Question 1. The assessment process reveals a Delaware real estate broker is considering representing both the buyer and the seller in the same residential property transaction. Which of the following actions best upholds the principles of transparency and disclosure as mandated by Delaware real estate law and ethical practice? Option A. Proactively obtaining informed, written consent from both the buyer and the seller for dual agency before engaging in substantive negotiations, or disclosing any confidential information, clearly outlining the broker's role and potential conflicts. Option B. Prioritizing the seller's desire for the highest possible price by subtly discouraging the buyer from making a higher offer, without explicitly informing the buyer of this strategy. Option C. Disclosing the buyer's maximum offer price to the seller to encourage a quicker sale, while assuring the seller that the broker is working in their best interest. Option D. Proceeding with the transaction after verbally informing both parties that the broker will be representing both sides, assuming their understanding and agreement. Correct answer is A. Proactively obtaining informed, written consent from both the buyer and the seller for dual agency before engaging in substantive negotiations, or disclosing any confidential information, clearly outlining the broker's role and potential conflicts. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario where a Delaware real estate broker must navigate the critical importance of transparency and disclosure when representing both a buyer and a seller in the same transaction, a situation known as dual agency. This scenario is professionally challenging because it inherently creates potential conflicts of interest. The broker owes fiduciary duties to both parties, including loyalty, full disclosure, and acting in their best interests. Balancing these duties when the buyer wants the lowest price and the seller wants the highest price requires meticulous adherence to ethical standards and Delaware-specific real estate regulations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that neither party is disadvantaged due to the broker's dual role. The best professional practice involves obtaining informed written consent from both parties for dual agency before any substantive negotiations or disclosures of confidential information occur. This approach ensures that both the buyer and seller are fully aware of the broker's role and the potential conflicts of interest. Delaware law, specifically the Delaware Real Estate License Law and its associated regulations, mandates that brokers must disclose any potential conflicts of interest and obtain written consent from all parties involved when acting as a dual agent. This proactive disclosure and consent process is fundamental to maintaining ethical conduct and legal compliance, safeguarding the integrity of the transaction and the broker's license. An approach that fails to obtain explicit, informed written consent from both parties before proceeding with dual agency is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This could involve assuming consent or obtaining verbal consent, which is insufficient under Delaware law. Another incorrect approach is to disclose confidential information from one party to the other, even with the intention of facilitating the deal. This violates the fiduciary duty of loyalty and confidentiality owed to the party whose information is being disclosed. Furthermore, prioritizing one party's interests over the other, even subtly, constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty and a violation of the transparency and disclosure requirements. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to the Delaware Real Estate License Law and its regulations. This framework involves identifying potential conflicts of interest early, understanding the specific disclosure requirements for each situation, especially dual agency, and always obtaining written, informed consent from all parties. When in doubt, seeking guidance from the Delaware Real Estate Commission or legal counsel is a prudent step. The core principle is to ensure that transparency and disclosure are not mere formalities, but are actively used to protect the interests of all parties involved and maintain the broker's professional integrity. Question 2. Strategic planning requires a Delaware real estate licensee to ensure that all agreements for the sale of property are legally sound and enforceable. If a written agreement for a property in Wilmington, Delaware, omits a material term, such as the financing contingency, what is the most appropriate course of action for the licensee to advise their client? Option A. Advise the client that the contract is likely unenforceable due to the material omission and recommend either a new, comprehensive agreement or a mutual termination of the current one. Option B. Recommend proceeding with the transaction and addressing the financing issue informally after closing. Option C. suggests that the omitted financing contingency can be proven and enforced through oral testimony. Option D. Advise the client that the contract is enforceable because the buyer is willing to proceed without the financing contingency. The correct answer is A. Advise the client that the contract is likely unenforceable due to the material omission, and recommend either a new, comprehensive agreement or a mutual termination of the current one. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate licensee to navigate the complexities of contract enforceability in Delaware, specifically concerning a situation where a material term was omitted from the written agreement. The licensee must understand the legal implications of such omissions and how they affect the validity and enforceability of the contract under Delaware real estate law. Careful judgment is required to advise the client appropriately and avoid potential legal repercussions for both the client and the licensee. The best approach involves advising the client that the contract, as written, is likely unenforceable due to the material omission of the financing contingency. Delaware law, like most jurisdictions, requires real estate contracts to be in writing and to contain all essential terms to be enforceable under the statute of frauds. A financing contingency is a material term, as it directly impacts the buyer's ability to complete the purchase. Its absence means the agreement does not reflect the true understanding of the parties and lacks a crucial element for a valid real estate transaction. Therefore, the licensee should recommend that the parties either execute a new, comprehensive agreement that includes all essential terms, including the financing contingency, or mutually agree to terminate the current agreement. This aligns with the ethical duty of a licensee to ensure clients understand the legal implications of their agreements and to act in their best interest by promoting lawful and enforceable transactions. An incorrect approach would be to advise the client that the contract is enforceable because the buyer is willing to proceed without the financing contingency. This fails to recognize that enforceability is determined by the terms of the written agreement itself and the requirements of Delaware's statute of frauds, not solely by the current willingness of one party. The omission of a material term renders the contract fundamentally flawed and potentially voidable, regardless of subsequent buyer sentiment. Another incorrect approach would be to suggest that the omitted financing contingency can be proven through oral testimony. While oral agreements can sometimes be binding, Delaware's statute of frauds specifically requires contracts for the sale of real estate to be in writing and to contain all material terms. Oral evidence cannot typically be used to supply a missing material term in a written real estate contract. Finally, advising the client to proceed with the transaction and address the financing issue informally later is also an incorrect and professionally risky approach. This bypasses the legal requirements for a valid contract and exposes both the buyer and seller to significant legal disputes and potential financial losses. It also violates the licensee's duty to ensure the transaction is conducted in a legally sound manner from its inception. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with a thorough understanding of the written contract and its compliance with Delaware's statute of frauds. If a material term is missing or ambiguous, the licensee must identify this deficiency and its potential impact on enforceability. The licensee should then consult relevant Delaware real estate law and, if necessary, advise the client to seek legal counsel from a qualified attorney to ensure the contract accurately reflects the parties' intentions and is legally binding. The primary ethical obligation is to facilitate lawful and enforceable transactions, protecting the interests of all parties involved. Question 3. The audit findings indicate a potential gap in understanding fundamental real estate concepts among licensees, considering Delaware's regulatory framework. Which of the following best defines the scope of real estate for the purpose of licensed brokerage activities? Option A. The land itself, including any permanent structures attached to it, along with all the legal rights and interests associated with its ownership. Option B. The monetary value assigned to the land and any structures, as determined by market conditions. Option C. The physical land and any permanent structures situated upon it, excluding any intangible rights or interests. Option D. Only the permanent structures built on a parcel of land, disregarding the land itself and associated rights. The correct answer is A. The land itself, including any permanent structures attached to it, along with all the legal rights and interests associated with its ownership. Explanation. The The audit findings indicate a potential misunderstanding of fundamental real estate principles within a brokerage. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the licensee to distinguish between the broad concept of real estate and its specific legal and economic implications, which are crucial for compliant and ethical practice in Delaware. A clear understanding of what constitutes real estate is foundational to all brokerage activities, including proper listing, advertising, and transaction management. The best professional practice involves recognizing that real estate encompasses not only the physical land and any permanent structures, but also the bundle of rights associated with ownership. This understanding is vital for accurately representing properties, advising clients, and adhering to Delaware's real estate laws and regulations, which define property rights and transfer procedures. This comprehensive view ensures that all aspects of a property transaction are considered, from tangible assets to intangible rights like easements or mineral rights. An incorrect approach would be to define real estate solely as the physical land and buildings. This narrow definition fails to account for the complex legal rights that are integral to property ownership and transfer. Such a limited perspective could lead to misrepresentation in listings, incomplete contracts, and potential disputes over rights that were not properly identified or conveyed. This violates the duty of competence and diligence required of licensed real estate professionals in Delaware. Another incorrect approach is to consider real estate as only the market value of the land and structures. While market value is a critical component of a real estate transaction, it is distinct from the definition of real estate itself. Focusing solely on market value overlooks the legal and physical characteristics that define the property, potentially leading to transactions that do not accurately reflect the property's true nature or the rights being exchanged. This can result in legal complications and a failure to meet client expectations regarding what they are purchasing or selling. A further incorrect approach is to view real estate as simply the physical structures present on a parcel of land. This ignores the fundamental importance of the land itself, which is the primary component of real property. It also neglects the associated rights and interests that are legally recognized as part of real estate ownership. This oversight can lead to significant errors in property descriptions, valuation, and the legal transfer of ownership, contravening Delaware's statutory requirements for real estate transactions. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of foundational definitions as established by state law and regulatory bodies. When faced with ambiguity, or a need to clarify a concept like real estate, licensees should consult Delaware's real estate statutes, regulations, and any official guidance provided by the Delaware Real Estate Commission. Ethical practice demands a commitment to continuous learning and accurate representation, ensuring that all professional activities are grounded in a precise and comprehensive understanding of the subject matter. Question 4. The audit findings indicate that a Delaware real estate licensee, when representing a seller, failed to adequately differentiate between the seller's outright ownership of a property and a long-term leasehold interest in that same property. This led to confusion for the buyer regarding the extent of their future rights. Which of the following best describes the licensee's professional failing in this scenario? Option A. The licensee failed to advise the buyer on the intricacies of adverse possession laws in Delaware, which could impact their future claim to the property. Option B. The licensee did not properly explain the concept of joint tenancy, which includes the right of survivorship and how it differs from tenancy in common, where interests pass to heirs to the buyer. Option C. The licensee failed to accurately distinguish between a fee simple ownership, which represents the most complete form of ownership, and a leasehold interest, which grants the right to possess and use property for a specified period under a lease agreement, thereby misrepresenting the nature of the seller's interest and the buyer's potential acquisition. Option D. The licensee neglected to inform the buyer about the potential for eminent domain proceedings by the state of Delaware, which could affect any type of property ownership. Correct answer is C. The licensee failed to accurately distinguish between a fee simple ownership, which represents the most complete form of ownership, and a leasehold interest, which grants the right to possess and use property for a specified period under a lease agreement, thereby misrepresenting the nature of the seller's interest and the buyer's potential acquisition. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential misunderstanding of property ownership structures, which is a critical area for licensed real estate professionals in Delaware. This scenario is professionally challenging because misinterpreting or misrepresenting ownership types can lead to significant legal disputes, financial losses for clients, and regulatory sanctions for the licensee. Accurate knowledge and application of Delaware property law regarding ownership are paramount. The best professional approach involves clearly distinguishing between the rights and responsibilities associated with each ownership type, particularly fee simple and leasehold estates, and understanding the nuances of concurrent ownership like joint tenancy and tenancy in common. This requires a thorough understanding of how title is held, the duration of the interest, and the rights of survivorship or inheritance. A failure to accurately identify and explain these distinctions to a client, or to correctly advise on the implications of each ownership type for a specific transaction, constitutes a breach of professional duty. This can include misrepresenting the nature of the seller's interest, leading a buyer to believe they are acquiring full ownership when they are only acquiring a leasehold, or failing to explain the differences in inheritance or saleability between joint tenancy and tenancy in common. Such actions violate the duty of care owed to clients and potentially violate Delaware's real estate licensing laws and regulations, which mandate competence and ethical conduct. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client education and accurate representation. This involves 1. Thoroughly reviewing all property documentation to ascertain the exact nature of the ownership interest. 2. Consulting relevant Delaware statutes and case law pertaining to property ownership. 3. Clearly and concisely explaining the implications of the identified ownership type to the client, using plain language and avoiding jargon. 4. Documenting all advice given and client decisions made. 5. Seeking legal counsel when complex ownership structures or ambiguities arise. Question 5. Quality control measures reveal that a Delaware real estate broker, while reviewing the title report for a property listed for sale, has identified a recorded easement granting a neighbor the right to cross a portion of the property to access a shared driveway. The client, the seller, is eager to proceed with the sale and has expressed concerns about how this easement might affect potential buyers' interest in building a backyard pool. What is the most appropriate course of action for the broker? Option A. Advise the seller that the easement is old and probably unenforceable, suggesting the buyer proceed with pool construction and address any potential issues later. Option B. Assure the seller that the easement is likely a minor issue that will not significantly hinder the buyer's ability to construct a backyard pool based on the broker's experience. Option C. Offer to draft a simple agreement for the seller to sign, stating that the easement is no longer valid, to present to the buyer. Option D. Inform the seller that a recorded easement has been identified on the title report and strongly advise them to have the buyer consult with a qualified real estate attorney to understand the easement's implications for their intended use of the property. Correct answer is D. Inform the seller that a recorded easement has been identified on the title report and strongly advise them to have the buyer consult with a qualified real estate attorney to understand the easement's implications for their intended use of the property. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a Delaware real estate broker to navigate the complexities of property rights and ownership, specifically concerning easements, without overstepping their professional boundaries or providing legal advice. The broker must understand how to identify potential issues related to property rights and guide the client appropriately without acting as an attorney. This requires a delicate balance between providing helpful information and adhering to licensing regulations that prohibit the unauthorized practice of law. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the broker clearly identifying the existence of a recorded easement on the property title report and advising the client to consult with a qualified real estate attorney to understand the full implications of this easement on their intended use of the property. This approach is correct because it acknowledges the broker's role in identifying material facts affecting the property, such as recorded encumbrances like easements, while strictly adhering to Delaware law and ethical guidelines by deferring legal interpretation and advice to a licensed attorney. Brokers are expected to disclose all known material facts, and a recorded easement is a material fact. However, explaining the legal effect or advising on how to proceed with the easement falls under the purview of legal counsel. Incorrect approach is analysis. Advising the client that the easement is merely a minor inconvenience and will not significantly impact their plans for a backyard pool is professionally unacceptable. This constitutes providing legal interpretation and advice regarding the easement's impact, which is the unauthorized practice of law in Delaware. The broker is not qualified to make such a determination, and their opinion could lead to significant legal and financial repercussions for the client if it proves incorrect. Suggesting that the client can simply ignore the easement and proceed with their pool construction, as it is an old easement that is unlikely to be enforced, is also a violation of professional conduct. This approach not only involves providing legal advice about the enforceability of an easement, but also encourages the client to engage in potentially illegal activity. Brokers have a duty to disclose all material facts and cannot advise clients to disregard recorded encumbrances. Offering to draft a quitclaim deed to extinguish the easement, based on the broker's understanding of property law, is a severe ethical and legal breach. This action directly involves the practice of law, including the preparation of legal documents and advising on legal strategies to alter property rights. Such actions are strictly prohibited for licensed real estate brokers in Delaware and can result in severe penalties, including license revocation. Professional reasoning. Professionals in real estate brokerage must operate within the defined scope of their license and expertise. When faced with situations that require legal interpretation, advice, or the drafting of legal documents, the professional decision-making process dictates immediate referral to a qualified legal professional. This involves identifying the material fact, the recorded easement, disclosing its existence to the client, and then recommending consultation with an attorney to understand its legal ramifications and potential courses of action. This ensures the client receives accurate legal guidance, while the broker remains compliant with regulations and ethical standards. Question 6. Compliance review shows a Delaware real estate licensee is advising clients about the current state of the local housing market. Which of the following approaches best reflects professional best practice and adherence to Delaware's real estate regulations when discussing real estate cycles and trends? Option A. Advise clients that real estate cycles are unpredictable and irrelevant to individual property transactions, focusing only on the immediate needs of the client. Option B. Guarantee a specific rate of property appreciation within the next 12 months for all clients, based on the licensee's optimistic outlook for the Delaware market. Option C. Emphasize that the market is currently in a strong seller's market and encourage all clients to list their properties immediately, regardless of their personal circumstances or long-term goals. Option D. Acknowledge the current phase of the real estate cycle and explain its potential implications for buyers and sellers in Delaware, advising clients on strategies aligned with observed trends without making definitive predictions. The correct answer is D. Acknowledge the current phase of the real estate cycle and explain its potential implications for buyers and sellers in Delaware, advising clients on strategies aligned with observed trends without making definitive predictions. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate licensee in Delaware to interpret and act upon broad economic indicators that influence the local housing market, balancing client interests with market realities. A licensee must avoid making definitive predictions or guarantees, instead focusing on providing informed guidance based on observable trends. The best professional approach involves acknowledging the current phase of the real estate cycle and explaining its potential implications for buyers and sellers in Delaware. This means discussing whether the market appears to be in an expansionary phase, a peak, a contraction, or a trough, and how these conditions might affect property values, demand, and negotiation leverage. The licensee should then advise clients on strategies that align with these observed trends, emphasizing that real estate is subject to market fluctuations and that past performance is not indicative of future results. This approach is ethically sound and compliant with Delaware's real estate regulations, which mandate honest and fair dealing and prohibit misrepresentation or the making of false promises. Providing objective market analysis and guidance, rather than speculative forecasts, upholds the licensee's fiduciary duty to their clients. An incorrect approach would be to definitively predict a specific market outcome, such as guaranteeing a certain price appreciation or a rapid sale within a fixed time frame, regardless of the current cycle phase. This constitutes a misrepresentation and a false promise, violating Delaware's real estate licensing laws and ethical standards. Such a prediction ignores the inherent volatility of real estate markets and places undue reliance on speculative outcomes, potentially leading to client dissatisfaction and legal repercussions. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the influence of real estate cycles altogether and operate as if market conditions are static. This demonstrates a lack of professional competence and a failure to provide clients with the comprehensive market understanding they are entitled to. Delaware licensees are expected to be knowledgeable about market dynamics, including cyclical trends, and to use this knowledge to advise clients effectively. Ignoring these trends is a dereliction of professional duty. Finally, an incorrect approach involves focusing solely on short-term gains without considering the broader market context. While immediate client needs are important, a responsible licensee must also educate clients about the potential long-term implications of market cycles on their investment or sale. Failing to do so can lead to clients making decisions that are not in their best long-term interest, which is contrary to the principles of professional real estate practice. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes accurate market analysis, transparent communication, and client education. This involves staying informed about economic indicators, understanding the characteristics of different real estate market cycles, and translating this knowledge into actionable, yet non-guaranteed, advice for clients. The focus should always be on empowering clients with information to make informed decisions, rather than making predictions or guarantees. Question 7. During the evaluation of the Delaware real estate market for a potential client, a licensee is considering the impact of recent national economic news. Which of the following analytical approaches best reflects a thorough understanding of how economic factors influence local real estate markets? Option A. Analyzing how national interest rate changes, Delaware's specific employment growth sectors, and planned infrastructure projects in the region are likely to affect local housing supply and demand. Option B. Attributing all observed market changes in Delaware primarily to broad demographic trends without investigating underlying economic drivers. Option C. Relying solely on national economic reports and forecasts to predict the future direction of property values across all Delaware neighborhoods. Option D. Focusing exclusively on past sales data for comparable properties, without considering any current or anticipated economic shifts. The correct answer is A. Analyzing how national interest rate changes, Delaware's specific employment growth sectors, and planned infrastructure projects in the region are likely to affect local housing supply and demand. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a real estate licensee must navigate the complex interplay between broad economic trends and their specific, localized impact on property values and market activity within Delaware. Misinterpreting these factors can lead to inaccurate property valuations, misinformed client advice, and potentially unethical or even illegal conduct, such as steering clients towards or away from certain areas based on flawed economic assumptions. The Delaware Real Estate Commission expects licensees to possess a sophisticated understanding of how economic forces translate into tangible market conditions. The best approach involves a nuanced assessment of how macroeconomic indicators, such as interest rate fluctuations, employment trends in Delaware, and regional development projects, directly influence supply and demand dynamics within specific Delaware neighborhoods. This requires licensees to go beyond simply acknowledging general economic news and instead analyze how these factors are likely to affect property prices, inventory levels, and buyer/seller behavior in the immediate market area they serve. This is correct because it aligns with the ethical obligation to provide competent and diligent service, ensuring clients receive advice grounded in a realistic and localized understanding of market realities, as mandated by Delaware's professional licensing standards for real estate agents. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on national economic forecasts without considering their specific applicability to Delaware's unique economic landscape and real estate market. National trends may not accurately reflect local conditions due to variations in industry concentration, population growth, and regulatory environments. This failure to localize the analysis can lead to misleading advice. Another incorrect approach would be to focus exclusively on historical sales data for a particular property type without accounting for current or projected economic shifts. While historical data is a component of valuation, ignoring the forward-looking impact of economic factors like rising inflation or changes in consumer confidence would result in an incomplete and potentially inaccurate market assessment. A further incorrect approach would be to attribute market fluctuations solely to demographic shifts without considering the broader economic drivers that often influence those demographic changes. While demographics are important, economic factors like job creation or industry decline can significantly impact migration patterns and housing demand, making a purely demographic analysis insufficient. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying relevant macroeconomic indicators, then critically analyzes their potential impact on the specific Delaware market segment they are working within, and finally synthesizes this information with local market data to provide informed advice. This involves continuous learning and adaptation to evolving economic conditions. Question 8. What factors determine the correct classification of a property as residential, commercial, industrial, or agricultural for a real estate licensee operating in Delaware? Option A. The owner's stated intentions for future use or development. Option B. The presence of any dwelling regardless of the land's primary purpose. Option C. The property's primary use, zoning designation, and predominant physical characteristics. Option D. The property's potential market value for speculative investment. Correct answer is C. The property's primary use, zoning designation, and predominant physical characteristics. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because a real estate licensee must accurately classify a property to ensure they are operating within their expertise and adhering to Delaware's licensing regulations. Misclassifying a property can lead to misrepresentation, potential legal liabilities, and disciplinary action from the Delaware Real Estate Commission. Careful judgment is required to understand the primary use and characteristics of the property. The best professional approach involves a thorough assessment of the property's primary use and defining characteristics to determine its classification under Delaware real estate law and common industry practice. This includes considering factors such as zoning, intended use, and the predominant features of the land and any structures. For instance, a property primarily used for growing crops, even if it has a small dwelling, would likely be classified as agricultural, requiring specific knowledge and licensing considerations relevant to that sector. This aligns with the Delaware Real Estate License Act's intent to ensure licensees are competent in the types of properties they represent. An incorrect approach would be to classify a property solely based on the presence of a residential structure, regardless of its primary agricultural use. This fails to acknowledge the dominant purpose of the land and the specific regulations governing agricultural properties in Delaware, potentially leading to the licensee providing advice or services outside their scope of expertise or licensing. Another incorrect approach is to classify a property based on its potential for future development rather than its current primary use. While future potential is a factor in valuation, the classification for licensing and regulatory purposes typically hinges on the existing state and use of the property. Misclassifying based on speculation could lead to misrepresentation and a failure to comply with the specific disclosure requirements for the actual property type. Furthermore, classifying a property based on the owner's personal preference or stated intent without objective assessment of its physical characteristics and legal status is also professionally unsound. The classification must be based on verifiable facts and legal definitions, not subjective desires. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes accurate property classification by 1. Reviewing zoning ordinances and land use regulations for the specific municipality in Delaware. 2. Physically inspecting the property to assess its predominant features and current use. 3. Consulting with local planning and zoning officials if ambiguity exists. And 4. Understanding the specific licensing requirements and ethical obligations associated with each property type, residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural, as defined by the Delaware Real Estate Commission. Question 9. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a rigorous tenant screening process can reduce financial risk for property owners in Delaware. A broker is tasked with selecting a tenant for a rental property. Which of the following screening and selection processes best aligns with Delaware's fair housing regulations and ethical best practices? Option A. Give preferential treatment to applicants who are personal acquaintances of the property owner, regardless of their objective qualifications. Option B. Inquire about an applicant's marital status and whether they plan to have children to gauge their long-term stability. Option C. Rely on the property owner's personal assessment of an applicant's perceived responsibility based on their appearance and demeanor during the showing. Option D. Develop a standardized checklist of objective criteria, including credit score, income verification, and rental history, and apply it consistently to all applicants. Correct answer is D. Develop a standardized checklist of objective criteria, including credit score, income verification, and rental history, and apply it consistently to all applicants. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate broker in Delaware to balance the business need for efficient tenant screening with the legal and ethical obligations to avoid discriminatory practices. The broker must navigate potential biases, both conscious and unconscious, while adhering to fair housing laws. Careful judgment is required to ensure that selection criteria are objective, consistently applied, and directly related to the applicant's ability to fulfill the lease obligations, rather than being based on protected characteristics. The best approach involves developing and consistently applying a standardized tenant screening process that focuses solely on objective, verifiable criteria directly related to the applicant's ability to pay rent and maintain the property. This includes reviewing credit reports, verifying income and employment, and checking rental history for past evictions or significant late payments. All applicants are evaluated against the same set of criteria, ensuring fairness and compliance with the Delaware Fair Housing Act and federal fair housing laws. This method minimizes the risk of illegal discrimination by removing subjective judgment from the selection process and focusing on the applicant's qualifications as a tenant. An approach that involves making subjective judgments about an applicant's responsibility based on their appearance or demeanor is professionally unacceptable. This introduces a high risk of unconscious bias and can lead to discriminatory decisions, violating fair housing laws. Such an approach lacks objectivity and cannot be consistently applied, making it difficult to defend against accusations of discrimination. Another unacceptable approach is to prioritize applicants who are friends or acquaintances of the property owner, even if other applicants appear more qualified based on objective screening criteria. This practice can lead to the exclusion of potentially excellent tenants who do not have a personal connection, and it opens the door to potential discrimination if the owner's personal preferences are influenced by protected characteristics. It undermines the principle of selecting the most qualified applicant based on merit. Finally, an approach that involves asking prospective tenants questions about their marital status, children, or plans for starting a family is also professionally unacceptable. These questions are often considered discriminatory under fair housing laws, as they can be used to screen out applicants based on familial status, a protected class. The focus should remain strictly on the applicant's financial stability and rental history. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes the development of a written tenant screening policy based on objective, non-discriminatory criteria. This policy should be applied uniformly to all applicants. Regular training on fair housing laws and best practices for tenant screening is crucial. When in doubt, seeking legal counsel to review screening practices and criteria is a prudent step to ensure compliance. Question 10. The audit findings indicate a potential miscalculation in the loan-to-value (LTV) ratio for a residential mortgage application in Delaware. The loan amount requested is $250,000, and the property's appraised value is $300,000. The loan officer, however, has recorded an LTV of 90%. Based on these figures, what is the correct LTV, and what is the dollar amount of the discrepancy? Option A. The correct LTV is approximately 75%, representing a discrepancy of $75,000. Option B. The correct LTV is approximately 33%, representing a discrepancy of $25,000. Option C. The correct LTV is 90%, representing no discrepancy. Option D. The correct LTV is approximately 33%, but the discrepancy is $250,000. The correct answer is B. The correct LTV is approximately 33%, representing a discrepancy of $25,000. Explanation: the audit findings indicate a potential miscalculation in the loan-to-value (LTV) ratio for a recent residential mortgage transaction in Delaware. This scenario is professionally challenging because an inaccurate LTV can lead to significant financial risks for both the lender and the borrower, potentially violating Delaware's real estate financing regulations and ethical standards. The auditor needs to assess the accuracy of the LTV calculation to ensure compliance with lending guidelines and to protect against predatory lending practices. The best approach involves recalculating the LTV using the correct formula and comparing it to the appraised value and the loan amount. This method is correct because it directly addresses the potential error by applying the established financial principle for determining the LTV ratio. In Delaware, accurate LTV calculations are fundamental to responsible lending, as mandated by regulations that aim to prevent over-leveraging and ensure borrowers are not taking on loans that exceed the value of their collateral. This meticulous recalculation ensures adherence to the spirit and letter of Delaware's real estate financing laws, which prioritize borrower protection and financial stability. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the borrower's stated income to justify the loan amount, without verifying the property's appraised value. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses a critical component of the LTV calculation and ignores regulatory requirements for property valuation. Such a practice could lead to lending in excess of the property's worth, increasing the risk of default and violating Delaware's emphasis on prudent lending practices. Another incorrect approach would be to adjust the appraised value upwards to meet a desired LTV without proper documentation or justification. This is ethically unsound and a violation of regulatory principles. Delaware's real estate financing regulations require appraisals to be objective and based on sound valuation methods. Manipulating an appraisal to fit a loan scenario undermines the integrity of the financing process and exposes all parties to undue risk. A third incorrect approach would be to ignore the LTV discrepancy and proceed with the loan, assuming the borrower's creditworthiness alone is sufficient. This is a failure to adhere to established risk assessment protocols and Delaware's regulatory framework for mortgage lending. While creditworthiness is important, the LTV is a primary indicator of collateral risk, and neglecting it can lead to significant losses for the lender and potential foreclosure for the borrower. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the core financial principles and regulatory requirements governing real estate financing in Delaware. This involves a commitment to accuracy, transparency, and risk mitigation. When a discrepancy is identified, the professional decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the specific calculation or process that appears flawed. 2. Applying the correct formula or procedure to verify the accuracy. 3. Consulting relevant Delaware real estate financing laws and ethical guidelines to determine the appropriate course of action. And 4. Documenting all findings and decisions thoroughly. This systematic approach ensures compliance and upholds professional integrity. Question 11. The efficiency study reveals that a commercial office building in Wilmington, Delaware, is being considered for sale, and the listing agent needs to establish a preliminary valuation. Which property valuation method would best reflect the property's market value in this context, considering its primary function as an income-generating asset? Option A. The income approach, by analyzing the property's potential to generate rental income and applying a capitalization rate to estimate its value. Option B. A valuation based primarily on the seller's stated desired sale price, irrespective of market data or established valuation methodologies. Option C. The cost approach, by estimating the current cost to construct a similar building and subtracting accrued depreciation. Option D. A comparative market analysis based on the sale prices of recently sold residential properties in the vicinity, without significant adjustments. The correct answer is A. The income approach, by analyzing the property's potential to generate rental income and applying a capitalization rate to estimate its value. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a need to accurately appraise a commercial property in Wilmington, Delaware, for a potential sale. This scenario is professionally challenging because the chosen valuation method must not only reflect the property's current market value, but also comply with Delaware's real estate licensing regulations and ethical standards for appraisers and brokers. Misapplication of valuation methods can lead to inaccurate pricing, potential legal repercussions, and damage to professional reputation. Careful judgment is required to select the most appropriate approach given the property type and purpose of the valuation. The most appropriate approach involves a thorough analysis of the property's income-generating potential. This method, known as the income approach, is particularly relevant for commercial properties, as their value is often directly tied to the revenue they can produce. It involves estimating the net operating income (NOI) and then capitalizing that income into a value. This aligns with Delaware's regulatory framework, which emphasizes fair and accurate representation of property value. Ethically, using the income approach for a commercial property demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to providing a valuation that reflects the primary driver of value for such assets, thereby protecting the client's interests. An approach that focuses solely on the replacement cost of the building, without adequately considering its income-generating capacity or market comparables, is professionally unacceptable. While the cost approach can be a useful tool, it is generally less reliable for older commercial properties, where depreciation is difficult to accurately estimate and market demand for the specific type of property may be more influential than construction costs. Relying on this method alone could lead to an inflated or deflated valuation, failing to meet the Delaware Real Estate Commission standards for competent appraisal practice. Another inappropriate approach would be to solely rely on the sale prices of dissimilar properties, without making appropriate adjustments for differences in size, condition, location, or income potential. This superficial application of the comparative market analysis (CMA) method ignores the nuances of commercial real estate valuation. Delaware regulations require that any comparative analysis be robust and supported by adjustments that accurately reflect market realities, ensuring that the comparison is truly relevant and not misleading. Finally, an approach that prioritizes the seller's desired sale price over a data-driven valuation is ethically and regulatorily unsound. Professional appraisers and brokers in Delaware are bound by a duty to provide objective valuations based on sound methodology and market data, not on subjective preferences or predetermined outcomes. This practice undermines the integrity of the appraisal process and violates the principles of fair dealing expected by the Delaware Real Estate Commission. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the purpose of the valuation and the specific characteristics of the property. For commercial properties, the income approach is often the primary method, supplemented by the sales comparison approach, and, where appropriate, the cost approach. A comprehensive valuation will consider multiple approaches and reconcile the results to arrive at the most accurate and defensible value. Adherence to Delaware's real estate laws and ethical guidelines is paramount throughout this process. Question 12. Operational review demonstrates that a landlord in Wilmington, Delaware, wishes to rent out a single-family home. The tenant is a recent graduate looking for a place to stay for at least a year, but may need to relocate for a job opportunity after 10-12 months. The landlord desires some flexibility in case they decide to sell the property within the next 18 months. Considering these circumstances and Delaware's landlord-tenant regulations, which approach to drafting the lease agreement is most advisable? Option A. Draft a month-to-month lease agreement, as this offers maximum flexibility for both parties to end the tenancy with minimal notice. Option B. Propose a one-year fixed-term lease with a clause allowing the landlord to terminate early with 60 days written notice if the property is listed for sale, and a clause allowing the tenant to terminate early with 30 days written notice and a penalty equivalent to 1 month's rent if they must relocate for employment. Option C. Create a lease agreement that simply states the rent amount and duration of occupancy without detailing specific termination clauses or responsibilities for repairs. Option D. Offer a 2-year fixed-term lease to provide long-term security for the tenant and ensure consistent rental income for the landlord. The correct answer is B. Propose a 1-year fixed-term lease with a clause allowing the landlord to terminate early with 60 days written notice if the property is listed for sale, and a clause allowing the tenant to terminate early with 30 days written notice, and a penalty equivalent to 1 month's rent if they must relocate for employment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for real estate professionals in Delaware, navigating the nuances of lease agreements to protect both landlord and tenant interests while adhering to state regulations. The challenge lies in identifying the most appropriate lease type for a specific situation and ensuring all terms and conditions are clearly defined and legally sound, thereby minimizing potential disputes and ensuring compliance with Delaware landlord-tenant law. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly understanding the client's needs and the property's characteristics to recommend a lease agreement that aligns with Delaware's statutory requirements and common practices for residential tenancies. This includes identifying whether a fixed-term lease or a month-to-month lease is most suitable, and meticulously detailing all essential terms such as rent amount, payment schedule, security deposit provisions, maintenance responsibilities, and any specific rules or restrictions. This approach ensures clarity, legal compliance under Delaware law, and a reduced likelihood of future conflicts, thereby safeguarding the interests of all parties involved. Incorrect approaches analysis. Recommending a lease agreement without a clear understanding of the tenant's intended duration of stay or the landlord's flexibility would be a significant professional failing. This could lead to a lease that is either too restrictive for the tenant or too open-ended for the landlord, potentially violating implied terms or creating grounds for early termination disputes under Delaware law. Similarly, failing to explicitly define the responsibilities for property maintenance, such as who is responsible for minor repairs versus major structural issues, creates ambiguity that can lead to tenant dissatisfaction and potential legal action, as Delaware law often implies certain landlord responsibilities. Furthermore, neglecting to clearly outline the terms of the security deposit, including the maximum allowable amount and the conditions for its return as per Delaware statutes, exposes both parties to potential disputes and legal challenges. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a client-centric and legally informed approach. This involves active listening to understand client objectives, conducting due diligence on the property and local regulations, and then recommending lease structures and terms that are both practical and compliant. A systematic review of standard lease clauses, tailored to the specific circumstances and Delaware's landlord-tenant statutes, is crucial. When in doubt about specific legal interpretations or complex clauses, consulting with legal counsel specializing in Delaware real estate law is a prudent step. Question 13. The audit findings indicate discrepancies in the budgeting process and inaccuracies in financial reporting for a Delaware licensed brokerage firm. Which of the following actions best addresses these findings while ensuring compliance with Delaware's financial management regulations for broker-dealers? Option A. Focus on communicating to stakeholders that the firm's financial health is sound, without undertaking a deep dive into the specific audit findings. Option B. Implement superficial adjustments to reporting templates and budget summaries without investigating the underlying causes of the inaccuracies. Option C. Acknowledge the audit findings but consider them minor issues that do not warrant significant changes to current operational practices. Option D. Conduct a thorough review of internal controls and procedures related to budgeting, financial reporting, and record-keeping. Identify root causes of the discrepancies, and implement targeted corrective actions with comprehensive documentation. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough review of internal controls and procedures related to budgeting, financial reporting, and record-keeping. Identify root causes of the discrepancies, and implement targeted corrective actions with comprehensive documentation. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential breakdown in financial management practices within a Delaware licensed brokerage firm. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the firm's management to not only address immediate audit concerns, but also to implement robust systems that prevent future recurrences, all while adhering to Delaware's specific regulatory requirements for financial record-keeping and reporting. The pressure to maintain client trust and regulatory compliance necessitates a thorough and principled response. The best approach involves a comprehensive review and enhancement of internal controls related to budgeting, reporting, and record-keeping, with a specific focus on identifying and rectifying the root causes of the audit findings. This includes a detailed examination of existing policies and procedures, ensuring they align with Delaware's financial regulations for broker-dealers, such as those promulgated by the Delaware Secretary of State or relevant self-regulatory organizations, SRO, that Delaware brokers must follow. The firm should then implement corrective actions, which may involve staff training, system upgrades, or revised workflows, and document these changes thoroughly. This proactive and systematic approach demonstrates a commitment to regulatory compliance and sound financial stewardship, directly addressing the audit's concerns and strengthening the firm's operational integrity. An incorrect approach would be to dismiss the audit findings as minor or isolated incidents without a thorough investigation. This failure to conduct a root cause analysis risks perpetuating the underlying issues, potentially leading to more significant compliance violations and financial mismanagement. It neglects the fiduciary duty to maintain accurate financial records and report them truthfully, as required by Delaware law and industry standards. Another incorrect approach is to implement superficial changes that do not address the fundamental weaknesses identified by the audit. For example, merely updating a budget document without revising the processes that led to its inaccuracies, or making minor adjustments to reporting formats without ensuring the underlying data integrity, would be insufficient. Such actions fail to meet the spirit and letter of regulatory requirements for robust financial management and could be viewed as an attempt to circumvent genuine compliance. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on external perception management without substantive internal reform is also professionally unacceptable. While maintaining a positive public image is important, it cannot substitute for genuine adherence to financial regulations and ethical practices. Prioritizing appearances over the actual correction of financial management deficiencies would be a serious ethical lapse and a violation of regulatory expectations for transparency and accountability. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the specific regulatory framework applicable in Delaware for broker-dealers. This involves consulting relevant statutes, regulations, and any guidance issued by the Delaware Division of Corporations or applicable SROs. A systematic risk assessment should then be conducted to identify the precise nature and scope of the financial management deficiencies. Based on this assessment, a corrective action plan should be developed, implemented, and meticulously documented. Regular internal audits and reviews should be established to ensure ongoing compliance and to proactively identify and mitigate future risks. Question 14. Governance review demonstrates that a Delaware licensed mortgage broker is assisting a client with a loan application. The client has a few minor blemishes on their credit report and a slightly elevated debt-to-income ratio, but the broker believes the client is otherwise creditworthy and will be able to manage the loan. The broker is concerned that a thorough underwriting review might lead to a denial. Which of the following actions best upholds the broker's professional and regulatory obligations in Delaware? Option A. Advise the client to temporarily pay off certain outstanding debts just prior to the application to artificially improve their debt-to-income ratio without informing the underwriter of this temporary measure. Option B. Repeatedly contact the underwriter with urgent requests for immediate approval, suggesting that the broker's business relationship with the lender depends on a swift and favorable outcome. Option C. Provide the underwriter with all requested documentation, including explanations for any discrepancies or concerns, and advocate for the client by clearly presenting their overall financial picture and ability to repay. Option D. Emphasize only the client's positive financial attributes and omit any mention of the credit report blemishes or the elevated debt-to-income ratio when submitting the application package. The correct answer is C. Provide the underwriter with all requested documentation, including explanations for any discrepancies or concerns, and advocate for the client by clearly presenting their overall financial picture and ability to repay. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a broker to balance the client's immediate desire for loan approval with the stringent regulatory requirements for responsible underwriting. The broker must avoid actions that could be construed as pressuring or misleading the underwriter, while also ensuring the client's legitimate financial situation is accurately represented. The core tension lies in navigating the gray area between advocating for a client and circumventing established risk assessment protocols. The best approach involves diligently gathering all necessary documentation and presenting a complete, accurate, and transparent picture of the borrower's financial standing to the underwriter. This includes providing all requested supporting documents promptly and addressing any concerns raised by the underwriter with factual information and clear explanations. This method is correct because it adheres strictly to the principles of responsible lending and the Delaware Division of Professional Regulations guidelines for licensed brokers, which emphasize honesty, integrity, and the accurate representation of financial information. It ensures that the loan decision is based on a thorough and objective assessment of risk, protecting both the lender and the borrower from potential future financial distress. An incorrect approach would be to selectively highlight only the positive aspects of the borrower's financial profile, while omitting or downplaying any negative factors, such as a history of late payments or a high debt-to-income ratio. This is ethically problematic, as it misrepresents the borrower's true financial capacity and violates the duty of full disclosure. It also contravenes Delaware regulations that mandate truthful and accurate representations in all dealings related to loan origination. Another incorrect approach would be to pressure the underwriter by repeatedly calling and demanding an immediate decision, implying that the broker's reputation or future business is contingent on a quick approval. This tactic is unprofessional and can be seen as an attempt to unduly influence the underwriting process, which is designed to be an objective assessment of risk. Such behavior undermines the integrity of the lending process and could lead to regulatory scrutiny. A further incorrect approach would be to suggest to the borrower that certain debts can be temporarily paid off just before the application to artificially improve their credit score or debt-to-income ratio for the purpose of loan approval, without disclosing this strategy to the underwriter. This constitutes a form of deception, as it creates a misleading impression of the borrower's ongoing financial stability. Delaware regulations require transparency in all aspects of the loan application process, and such a maneuver would be a clear violation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance, ethical conduct, and client advocacy within the bounds of responsible lending. This involves understanding the underwriting process thoroughly, communicating transparently with both the client and the underwriter, and always acting with integrity. When faced with challenging situations, professionals should seek clarification from regulatory bodies or legal counsel if unsure about the appropriate course of action, rather than resorting to potentially unethical or non-compliant practices. Question 15. Governance review demonstrates that a seller in Wilmington, Delaware, has instructed their real estate agent to only show their property to prospective buyers who do not have children. The agent is aware that Delaware's Fair Housing Act prohibits discrimination based on familial status. What is the most appropriate course of action for the agent? Option A. Agree to the seller's request and attempt to subtly discourage families with children from viewing the property. Option B. Proceed with marketing the property without acknowledging or addressing the seller's discriminatory request. Option C. Politely inform the seller that their request to exclude buyers based on familial status is illegal under Delaware law and federal fair housing laws, and that the agent cannot comply with such a discriminatory instruction. Offering to market the property to all qualified buyers. Option D. Refuse to represent the seller entirely due to their discriminatory request, without further explanation or attempt at education. The correct answer is C. Politely inform the seller that their request to exclude buyers based on familial status is illegal under Delaware law and federal fair housing laws, and that the agent cannot comply with such a discriminatory instruction, offering to market the property to all qualified buyers. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a real estate agent must navigate a client's discriminatory request while upholding legal obligations and ethical standards. The agent's duty is to facilitate a transaction according to the client's lawful instructions, but not to participate in or enable illegal discrimination. Careful judgment is required to refuse the discriminatory request without alienating the client or jeopardizing the business relationship, while simultaneously ensuring compliance with fair housing laws. The best professional approach involves clearly and politely informing the client that their request to exclude potential buyers based on their familial status is illegal under Delaware's Fair Housing Act and federal law. The agent must then explain that they cannot fulfill such a request and offer to proceed with marketing the property to all qualified buyers without regard to familial status. This approach directly addresses the illegality of the request, educates the client on their rights and obligations, and maintains the agent's professional integrity and legal compliance. It prioritizes adherence to the Delaware Real Estate Commission's regulations and the principles of fair housing. An incorrect approach would be to agree to the client's request and attempt to subtly steer potential buyers away based on their familial status. This is a direct violation of the Delaware Fair Housing Act, which prohibits discrimination in housing based on familial status. Such an action would expose the agent and their brokerage to significant legal penalties, disciplinary action from the Delaware Real Estate Commission, and severe damage to their professional reputation. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the client's request and proceed with marketing the property without addressing the discriminatory instruction. While this might seem like a way to avoid direct confrontation, it fails to educate the client about fair housing laws and leaves the door open for potential future discriminatory actions or misunderstandings. It also misses an opportunity to reinforce ethical practices and legal compliance within the client relationship. A further incorrect approach would be to refuse to work with the client altogether solely because of their discriminatory request, without attempting to educate them or explain the legal ramifications. While the agent is not obligated to facilitate illegal acts, a more professional and constructive response involves attempting to guide the client towards lawful behavior first. A complete refusal without explanation might be perceived as unprofessional and could lead to the client seeking an agent who is less scrupulous. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve: first, identifying any request that appears to violate fair housing laws or ethical guidelines. Second, consulting relevant state, Delaware, and federal fair housing statutes and regulations. Third, clearly and respectfully communicating to the client why the request cannot be fulfilled, citing specific legal prohibitions. Fourth, offering to proceed with the transaction in a lawful and non-discriminatory manner. And fifth, documenting all communications and actions taken. Question 16. Governance review demonstrates that a Delaware real estate broker is advising a first-time homebuyer with a stable, predictable income and a strong desire for long-term financial certainty. The broker is considering recommending different mortgage types. Which approach best aligns with the broker's fiduciary duty and Delaware's regulatory expectations for client suitability? Option A. Recommend a mortgage product that offers the highest commission for the brokerage, provided the client can technically qualify. Option B. Recommend a fixed-rate mortgage, emphasizing its predictable monthly payments and protection against future interest rate increases. Option C. Recommend an interest-only mortgage, highlighting the reduced initial monthly payments without fully exploring the client's long-term repayment plan. Option D. Recommend an adjustable-rate mortgage due to its potentially lower initial interest rate, without extensively discussing the risks of future payment volatility. Correct answer is B. Recommend a fixed-rate mortgage, emphasizing its predictable monthly payments and protection against future interest rate increases. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a Delaware broker to assess a client's financial situation and risk tolerance to recommend a suitable mortgage product. Misalignment between the mortgage type and the client's circumstances can lead to significant financial distress for the client, potentially resulting in regulatory scrutiny and reputational damage for the broker. The broker must navigate the nuances of different mortgage products and apply them ethically and legally within Delaware's regulatory framework. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly understanding the client's long-term financial stability, income predictability, and aversion to payment fluctuations. Recommending a fixed-rate mortgage for a client with a stable income and a desire for predictable monthly expenses aligns with the principle of acting in the client's best interest, a core tenet of Delaware's real estate licensing laws and ethical guidelines. This approach prioritizes the client's financial security and peace of mind by offering a product that insulates them from interest rate risk over the life of the loan. Incorrect approach is analysis. Recommending an adjustable-rate mortgage solely because it offers a lower initial interest rate, without a comprehensive assessment of the client's ability to absorb future payment increases, fails to uphold the duty of care. This approach prioritizes potential short-term gains for the client or the brokerage over the client's long-term financial well-being and could violate Delaware's regulations regarding suitability. Suggesting an interest-only mortgage without a clear understanding of the client's exit strategy or ability to manage the principal repayment later in the loan term is also professionally unsound. This can lead to a situation where the client owes the full principal amount at the end of the term without having built equity, potentially leading to default or financial hardship, which contravenes ethical obligations and potentially Delaware's consumer protection laws. Recommending a mortgage product based primarily on the broker's commission structure rather than the client's needs is a clear ethical violation and could expose the broker to disciplinary action under Delaware's real estate regulations. This prioritizes self-interest over the client's welfare. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a client-centric approach. This involves active listening to understand the client's goals, financial capacity, and risk tolerance. A thorough needs assessment, documented in writing, should precede any product recommendation. Brokers must be knowledgeable about the features, risks, and benefits of all mortgage products they offer and be able to clearly explain these to clients in a way they can understand. When in doubt, or when a client's situation is complex, seeking clarification or advising the client to consult with a financial advisor is a prudent step. The ultimate goal is to ensure the recommended product is suitable and beneficial for the client's specific circumstances within the legal and ethical boundaries of Delaware. Question 17. Governance review demonstrates that a mortgage broker in Delaware has received a completed mortgage application from a prospective borrower who is eager to secure financing quickly. The borrower has expressed a strong desire to understand the potential costs and terms of the loan as soon as possible. What is the most appropriate and compliant action for the Delaware mortgage broker to take regarding the initial disclosures? Option A. Offer to provide the applicant with the loan estimate after they have verbally committed to proceeding with the loan application, to avoid overwhelming them with paperwork initially. Option B. Inform the applicant that the loan estimate can be reviewed at their convenience sometime next week, after the initial processing steps have been completed. Option C. Provide the applicant with a loan estimate detailing estimated loan terms, monthly payments, and closing costs within 3 business days of receiving the completed application. Option D. Present a verbal summary of estimated costs and terms to the applicant immediately, explaining that the formal loan estimate will be provided once the loan is approved. The correct answer is C. Provide the applicant with a loan estimate detailing estimated loan terms, monthly payments, and closing costs within 3 business days of receiving the completed application. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a mortgage broker in Delaware to balance the urgency of a client's need for financing with the strict regulatory requirements governing the mortgage application process. Failing to adhere to these regulations can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions, including fines, license suspension, and damage to the broker's reputation. The broker must exercise careful judgment to ensure all necessary disclosures are made accurately and timely, without misleading the applicant or circumventing established procedures. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately providing the applicant with the loan estimate within 3 business days of receiving their application, as mandated by federal regulations like the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, RESPA, and the Truth in Lending Act, TILA, which are enforced in Delaware. This document is crucial as it outlines the estimated loan terms, monthly payments, and closing costs. By providing this disclosure promptly, the broker ensures the applicant is fully informed about the potential costs and terms of the loan, enabling them to make an informed decision. This proactive approach aligns with ethical obligations to transparency and regulatory compliance, fostering trust and protecting the consumer. Incorrect approaches analysis. Providing the loan estimate only after the applicant has verbally agreed to proceed with the loan, without adhering to the 3 business day timeframe, is a regulatory failure. This delays the applicant's access to critical information, potentially leading them to commit to a loan without fully understanding its implications, which violates the spirit of consumer protection laws. Offering to expedite the process by only providing a summary of estimated costs without the formal loan estimate is also unacceptable. This bypasses the legally required disclosure document, which contains standardized information essential for comparison and understanding, thereby failing to meet regulatory disclosure requirements and potentially misleading the applicant. Suggesting that the applicant can review the loan estimate sometime next week, after they have already submitted their application and expressed intent to proceed, is a clear violation of the mandated disclosure timeline. This delay prevents the applicant from making an informed decision within the legally prescribed period, undermining the protective purpose of the disclosure requirements. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. When faced with a client's urgent request, the decision-making process should involve first identifying the mandatory disclosures and timelines. A robust framework includes understanding the purpose of each disclosure, e.g., the loan estimate's role in informing about costs and terms, the specific deadlines for providing them, and the potential consequences of noncompliance. If a client expresses urgency, the professional's responsibility is to explain the regulatory process and timelines, manage expectations, and then diligently adhere to all requirements to ensure both compliance and the client's informed consent. Question 18. System analysis indicates that a Delaware real estate licensee is representing a buyer in a transaction where the purchase agreement contains a property description that is vague and could potentially refer to multiple parcels of land within a larger tract owned by the seller. The parties have verbally discussed which specific parcel is intended, but this clarification has not been incorporated into the written contract. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensee to ensure the enforceability of the contract and protect their client's interests under Delaware real estate law? Option A. Assume the ambiguity is minor and will not become a legal issue, allowing the transaction to proceed without any formal amendment to the contract. Option B. Proceed with the transaction, relying on the parties' verbal discussions to clarify the intended property, as this is a common practice in informal real estate dealings. Option C. Advise the client that the contract is likely unenforceable due to the ambiguous property description, and recommend that the parties mutually agree to amend the contract to include a precise and legally sufficient description of the property. Option D. Interpret the ambiguous description based on the licensee's understanding of the parties' verbal conversations, and proceed with the contract as if the ambiguity is resolved. The correct answer is C. Advise the client that the contract is likely unenforceable due to the ambiguous property description, and recommend that the parties mutually agree to amend the contract to include a precise and legally sufficient description of the property. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for real estate licensees in Delaware, navigating the enforceability of a contract when a critical element, the legal description of the property, is ambiguous. The professional challenge lies in determining whether the contract, as written, meets the minimum legal requirements for enforceability under Delaware law, thereby protecting the client's interests while adhering to professional standards and avoiding potential legal disputes. Careful judgment is required to assess the degree of ambiguity and its impact on the contract's validity. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves recognizing that a contract for the sale of real estate in Delaware requires a sufficiently definite description of the property to be enforceable. This approach involves advising the client that the contract, as currently written, is likely unenforceable due to the vague property description. The licensee should then recommend that the parties mutually agree to amend the contract to include a precise and legally sufficient description, such as referencing a recorded plat, a metes and bounds description, or the tax parcel number, as required by Delaware real estate law and common law principles of contract enforceability. This proactive step ensures clarity, protects the client from potential litigation, and upholds the licensee's duty of competence and diligence. Incorrect approaches analysis. Proceeding with the transaction without addressing the ambiguous description is professionally unacceptable. This approach fails to uphold the licensee's duty to ensure the contract is legally sound and enforceable. Delaware law, like most jurisdictions, requires a clear identification of the subject matter of a real estate contract. A vague description can lead to disputes over the intended property, rendering the contract voidable or unenforceable. Attempting to interpret the ambiguous description based on the parties' verbal agreements, without formal amendment, is also professionally unsound. While verbal discussions may provide context, they do not alter the written terms of the contract. Relying on such discussions to clarify a material defect in the written agreement exposes both the parties and the licensee to significant legal risk. The written contract is the governing document, and any modifications must be in writing and signed by all parties to be enforceable under the statute of frauds, which applies to real estate contracts in Delaware. Assuming the ambiguity is minor and will not be an issue later is a dangerous and unprofessional assumption. Real estate contracts are significant legal documents, and even seemingly minor ambiguities can have major consequences. The licensee has a professional obligation to identify and address potential legal defects to protect their client's interests, rather than hoping a problem will not arise. This approach demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to adhere to professional standards of care. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Delaware should adopt a risk management approach when dealing with real estate contracts. This involves a thorough review of all contract terms to ensure they meet legal requirements and clearly reflect the parties' intentions. When ambiguity is identified, particularly concerning essential elements like the property description, the professional's duty is to advise the client of the potential legal ramifications and recommend corrective action. This typically involves seeking a written amendment to the contract that clarifies the ambiguity. The decision-making process should prioritize legal compliance, client protection, and the integrity of the transaction over expediency. Professionals must be knowledgeable about Delaware's real estate laws and contract principles to effectively identify and mitigate risks. Question 19. The performance metrics show a significant divergence in commission payouts based on the type of investment product recommended, leading to concerns about potential conflicts of interest and adherence to Delaware's regulatory standards for broker compensation. Which of the following represents the most prudent and compliant approach for a Delaware-licensed broker-dealer to address this situation? Option A. Focus on increasing sales volume across all product types, believing that overall revenue growth will naturally mitigate any concerns about individual commission disparities. Option B. Implement new commission structures that incentivize brokers to prioritize higher commission products, as this is a standard business practice for maximizing firm profitability. Option C. Continue with existing commission structures without further review, assuming they were acceptable at the time of implementation and that client consent was implicitly given. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of all commission structures and fee arrangements to ensure they are clearly disclosed in writing to clients, are reasonable for the services provided, and align with Delaware's regulations on fair dealing and transparency. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive review of all commission structures and fee arrangement to ensure they are clearly disclosed in writing to clients, are reasonable for the services provided, and align with Delaware's regulations on fair dealing and transparency. Explanation. The performance metrics show a significant disparity in commission payouts across different client segments, prompting a review of the firm's fee arrangements. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the firm's profitability with fair compensation for its brokers, while strictly adhering to Delaware's regulatory framework governing broker-dealer compensation and client agreements. Misinterpreting or misapplying these regulations can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions, including disciplinary actions by the Delaware Securities Commissioner. The best approach involves a thorough review of all existing commission structures and fee arrangements to ensure they are clearly disclosed to clients in writing, are reasonable in relation to the services provided, and comply with Delaware's specific regulations on disclosure and fairness. This includes verifying that any tiered commission structures are not inherently discriminatory or designed to incentivize brokers to push unsuitable products. Transparency and client consent are paramount, ensuring clients understand how their broker is compensated and that the compensation aligns with their best interests as mandated by fiduciary duties, where applicable, and general principles of fair dealing under Delaware law. An approach that focuses solely on maximizing firm revenue by implementing commission structures that disproportionately benefit the firm without clear client benefit or disclosure is ethically unsound and likely violates Delaware's regulations regarding fair dealing and disclosure. Such practices can be seen as deceptive or misleading. Another unacceptable approach is to maintain commission structures that are not clearly documented in writing and provided to clients prior to engagement. Lack of written disclosure prevents clients from making informed decisions about the services they are receiving and how their broker is compensated, which is a direct contravention of regulatory requirements for transparency. Finally, an approach that relies on verbal agreements or informal understandings regarding commission rates is professionally negligent and legally risky. Delaware law requires written agreements for many financial services transactions, and the absence of such documentation leaves both the client and the firm vulnerable and undermines the integrity of the professional relationship. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance, ethical conduct, and client transparency. This involves proactively reviewing all fee arrangements, ensuring they are documented in writing, clearly explained to clients, and demonstrably fair and reasonable in the context of the services rendered, always referencing the specific requirements of Delaware's securities laws and regulations. Question 20. Analysis of a Delaware real estate broker's commission calculation, a broker in Delaware has an exclusive right to sell listing agreement for a property. The listing agreement specifies a commission rate of 6% of the sale price. During the listing period, the broker receives 3 offers. Offer for $380,000, offer B for $400,000, and offer C for $410,000. The seller accepts offer B for $400,000. What is the correct commission the broker is entitled to, assuming no other commission-sharing agreements are in place? Option A, $22,800. Option B, $24,600. Option C, $23,400. Option D, $24,000. The correct answer is D, $24,000. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for real estate brokers in Delaware, accurately calculating commission based on different listing agreement types and ensuring compliance with Delaware's real estate regulations. The broker must understand the nuances of each agreement type to avoid disputes and potential legal ramifications. The core challenge lies in applying the correct commission structure to the sale price, especially when multiple offers are involved, and ensuring the calculation reflects the terms agreed upon in the listing contract. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously reviewing the executed listing agreement to determine the commission structure and the specific terms under which commission is earned. In this case, an exclusive right to sell agreement in Delaware entitles the broker to a commission regardless of who procures the buyer. The commission is typically a percentage of the sale price. Therefore, the broker should calculate the commission based on the agreed-upon percentage applied to the final sale price. For example, if the agreement specifies a 6% commission and the property sells for $400,000, the commission is \0.006 times $400,000 equals $24,000. This approach ensures adherence to the contractual obligations and Delaware's regulatory framework governing broker compensation. Incorrect approaches analysis. Calculating commission solely on the highest offer received before acceptance is incorrect because an exclusive right to sell agreement mandates commission on the actual sale price, not on potential or unaccepted offers. This fails to account for the final negotiated and agreed-upon sale price, potentially underpaying the broker or leading to disputes if the final sale price differs. Applying a commission only if the broker directly procured the buyer, despite an exclusive right to sell agreement, is a fundamental misunderstanding of this contract type. Delaware law and standard real estate practice dictate that the broker earns a commission if the property sells during the listing period, irrespective of the procuring cause. This approach violates the terms of the exclusive right to sell agreement and Delaware's regulatory requirements for commission entitlement. Calculating commission based on an average of all offers received is also incorrect. Listing agreements, particularly exclusive right to sell, are based on a specific percentage of the final sale price. Averaging offers disregards the agreed-upon commission structure and the actual transaction value, leading to an inaccurate and potentially unenforceable commission calculation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always prioritize a thorough review of the executed listing agreement. Understanding the specific terms of an exclusive right to sell, exclusive agency, or open listing is paramount. When calculating commission, the broker must identify the agreed-upon percentage and the basis for the calculation, usually the sale price. In Delaware, adherence to the Delaware Real Estate Commission's regulations and the terms of the written listing agreement is non-negotiable. When faced with multiple offers, the broker's duty is to ensure the commission is calculated on the final, accepted sale price, reflecting the terms of the exclusive right to sell agreement.